We're recording. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Sustainiacs. I am Michael Vincent. I'm always a Sustainiac. This week, I have Nathan Johnson, not from the movie The Jerk, but he is Nathan, nor is he one. He is actually associate professor in the Polytechnic School of the Ira A. Fulton School of Engineering at Arizona State University, ASU, and a bunch of other stuff here. I mean, there's I could read this for like a half an hour, my friend. I don't know. Does this go all the way through early childhood, or is this just what you're doing now?
Just what I'm doing right now, but if you want,
That's
we can
amazing.
double the sequence and talk about my forays into tennis and swimming as a youth.
We can certainly talk about that. I'd love for you to introduce people to who you are and how you got involved in what you're doing right now, brother, and what Arizona's going on. Welcome to the show, Nathan, by the way.
Happy to be here. And Mike, you brought up a great point. Is I didn't star in the movie Jerk, and I currently Googled myself and the incognito mode so it doesn't follow search history. And I think I'm like fourth or fifth in the ranking of the generalized name Nathan Johnson. So clearly, I have a little bit more to do, punching above my weight to get to the class of the musicians and the performers.
Fourth or fifth page, or fourth or fifth listing.
Fourth or fifth listing.
Wow, that's impressive. We used to play this game where we'd put in our name. You couldn't play with the same group of people, but only once works really, and see who came up first. And I had one friend who came up on the first page every time. I'm always like the 10th or 11th page because it's like 11 pages of Jan Michael Vincent. I don't know if you remember that actor, but 11 pages of
Oh,
Jan Michael Vincent, and then there's me.
sure. I think maybe we're in the incorrect profession for popularity. Clearly, the entertainment industry, which you're leaning into potentially a little bit more than me. But I tell you though, being an educator and a professor, I mean, part of what your role needs to be is being an entertainer and engage people while you're providing content. So,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely, and you have to use fake turf for your flooring, right? Is that you can practice? Do you practice your putting while you're?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Actually, these green squares they put down in my office. I haven't used it for that yet, but I do know. I am taking my team for our annual strategy retreat in a month. We're going to go curling, so we're going to have 40 people on the ice curling with I think it's like 40-pound granite stone weights. And
Yeah,
none of us have done
yeah.
that before, so we're very curious as to what we'll learn and who will not get injured.
That if you get into, I could see pulling a groin or something, right? Trying to
Oh,
slide down the ice, doing the sweeping, right? I could
yeah,
see me
yeah.
doing the splits accidentally,
Well,
very, very
and
easily.
since we're a very applied engineering team, a good number of us also have steel-toed shoes, and so I'm wondering, for a safety perspective, if we'll bring those along so we don't crush any feet and toes.
I think you probably should. Yeah. Is curling legal in the state of Arizona? I mean,
It is, and there's actually a curling club in Phoenix, one of the hottest cities in the United States. I think last year we reached 57 consecutive days above 100. And was it above 100 or above 110? I think it was actually above 110. Like it was pretty brutal. And that's actually, part of this kind of roll into things where, where Arizona State University is, but then also my team is we're in a public institution and we're focused on that need and drive to create public value. And that's part of what, resonated with me and why I came here 11 years ago is to combine that like applied perspective of what does the globe need, what does society need, and what does the public need with the innovation. As we find a long, significant amount of times, the lineage and history of the many hundreds of years of academic institutions are still focused at, you know, creating knowledge and disseminating knowledge. But over that time frame, also that knowledge became a little bit more inwardly focused in publications that can't be accessed by the public in private settings that are too cost constrained for the public to access and engage in anymore. And while that could lead to public discourse and interest, in our 8 to 5, however long we work in a day, we wanted to find a way to utilize more of that time to create something that's directly desirable and meaningful for the broader population and not just the academic community. And so that's
yeah.
kind of where I came from my background growing up in rural Iowa. thinking about being a doctor and an engineer and asking those questions about how could I have impact on public and create public value. And then I lived internationally for a number of years, working on disaster cleanup, energy, business development, and emerging markets. Came back to the States. Finished my PhD in mechanical engineering and international development, and then came to ASU. And since then, growing a team that is very laser focused on decarbonization of the economy, reaching net zero, pulling carbon out of the air, and looking at ways that we can enhance renewables, energy security, and resilience in a way that also permits thriving people and thriving economies. And we do that globally still. And it's nice, kindly, Mike, to be here with you today to share some of that perspective and advance those topics as well.
That's fantastic. Great background in history and introduction, and why you're here. And I love that. What caught me. There's a lot of stuff that caught me, but the first thing that caught me and kind of trapped my brain was that when you said to disseminate and to create knowledge, right? And that is tremendous, and something that in academia, every professor, every teacher needs to understand both of those, because I've had so many that thought that their job was just to regurgitate or disseminate knowledge,
Yep,
right? When the whole practice is to create new knowledge from what we've known, and right, and take it and applied, right? Applied engineering of any concept is the creation of new knowledge, right?
absolutely. And if you would kindly also bring up slide two in what I when I shared and sent over, is a bit of a
Okay.
summary of Arizona State University being one of the nation's most productive in education research institutions. And so that is this coupling of innovation and dissemination, not just at speed, but also at scale. So we're also the largest public institution or largest educational institution in the United States with 146,000 students, have a number of uh, successes and awards for attaining that status, and that philosophy of generating knowledge and sharing it, we also realize doesn't just come in the classroom. And so outside of the classroom, about 2 million people per year engage in non-credit bearing education and learning. And what you see there on the lower left is the learning enterprise. So knowledge enterprise, creation of new IP, knowledge research, academic enterprise is the degree seeking students, and then the learning enterprise is the non-degree seeking students. And at the center of that is, you might say, the brain trust of partners, of employees, of professors, of staff, of students that generated and accelerate this innovation. And that's also, awarded us the excellent honor of also being good value for the money that is provided to a public institution in the shape of degree costs and more. We're creating a lot of value for what comes in.
Fantastic. I love it.
Is universities have a number of different thrusts of activities that they work on, and most of the knowledge and the education. We've also been fortunate in different sporting events, triathlon, swimming, and others, to have very successful teams
Oh yeah,
that are national
absolutely.
competitors and global competitors. But also that competition, of course, extends to student teams such as robotics competitions and more, and also one robotics group, an all-female student robotics club, Wave, won, I believe it was a national world championship for their competitions for creating an underwater robot to navigate as well. So all of it,
Cool.
from sports to academics, we try to excel at as best we can.
That's fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic. So, in your in your field specifically, what are you guys working on there, right? Because my attraction to your LinkedIn and getting you on was really from the energy side of it, right?
Yep.
And the development of new sustainable renewable green energies, and kind of breaking down what that is and what you guys are doing there at ASU. Because there's so many headlines out there, and there's so many detractors from this technology and promoters of that technology, et cetera, and money behind those as well. Was Let's not forget that the driving force most often is money. Where is reality, and what are you guys doing there? So if you would, that'd be awesome.
That's a really good point, and you're right about the financial interest, or what is the interest of a dollar, is to reproduce and create more of itself for return. And as we're seeing additional legislation and interest roll out globally for ESG, environmental, social, and governance rules, not just mandates, but some of them be voluntary, the shape and scope of those business models are changing. And so where we enjoy getting involved is, as a group, again, of about 40 people, some engineers, some not, some in policy, business, and others, is we like to get involved in problems that are at the intersection of innovation and technology, business models, and policy. Because that what allows us to do is engage in conversations and in action in a way that allows stakeholders not to be limited by their historical ways of working with each other or even the historical definitions of themselves. And if momentarily you could bring up slide 8, you actually share some of our motivations. And so you mentioned some of the financial motivations globally. Ours are very centered on realizing that after a flattening of loads in the Western or industrialized states, we're now seeing high load growth in certain states due to data centers, manufacturing, and more. We're also realizing that 700 million people do not have access to electricity, and over 2 billion people utilize solid fuel for cooking. Climate change is driving decarbonization of all of those things while we increase loads and increase energy access. Understanding also that fossil fuel supply lines, but then also certain customers want high reliability than can be provided by the grid or supply chains. So we get into security and stability. And that also leads into thriving societies, economic development, and then resilience. And sometimes also that's qualified as self reliance. And the graphics you see on the right just give you a little bit of background on the extent of energy used globally is a little bit darker blue. And on the lower right, the redder areas are the change in pace of energy use. And that's largely, again, driven due to mining, manufacturing, and the localization of production chains. So these are some of the motivations that get us out of bed and get us interested to do what we do.
Yeah, it's really an interesting slide, and I think the motivations. Boy, we could spend forever on those motivations, and you know, any one of those situations there, or points in your motivational factors, I guess is what I would call them,
Sure.
is really an important input when you're talking to developing of new or alternative energies or green or sustainable, and any one of them can derail it, right? And so I guess when you speak to just anyone, you pull out green hydrogen, there's 5 of those things in there that could
Yep.
completely derail it, right? Or even biodiesel or solar, in many of those. But the thing that really interests me, I mean, they all interest me, but the overall achievement, I wonder where this falls into it, because you
Sure.
talk about thriving societies, right? Is there is there a is there a factor in here that rules them all? Is there one factor to rule them all, one ring to rule them all?
I was
Um,
just going to the Lord of Rings analogy as well. The theme we can weave throughout our
yeah,
conversation.
because the one thing that presents itself to me is in where we're at right now is we have to develop something new, right? We have to, because eventually we're going to run it, regardless if you believe in climate change or not. I don't care. Polluting and throwing carbon in the atmosphere and that type of stuff is not a good idea, regardless of what's going on. So, uh, but we have the ability. We're sitting on the precipice of the ability to redistribute wealth through our new technologies, and so
Yep.
thriving societies to me has to be up there at the top. Or is there, or am I just erroneous in assuming that there is a more important, and they all really have to be looked at equally?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I love that kind of the the dialogue we can have on motivations and values, because that's really what we need to look at in terms of driving the decisions and actions we make. And if we just look at the actions without an understanding of the or text on a page without understanding of the underlying value system, um, it's hard to create new relationships between stakeholders or value propositions that enable them to work together in new ways. Thriving societies, I think, is up there for nearly everyone out there. But one thing I'd maybe provide as a complementing remark is that in looking at these motivations and similar ones, because I think many people, or the majority, would share at least most of these, is that looking at the global demand for renewables, energy security, lower cost power, if you look at the demand signal for that, and you were to then look at the supply signal for who can actually do that, the entire aggregated world supply of people, of technology, of policies is woefully inadequate to meet that demand signal. And that's what's happening due to load growth, climate change, energy access, and more. And that's why we want to have those up at the top of the list of ours. And if you could pull up slide 9 kindly briefly, that's when it comes to what we do, this is pretty critical for us. And so we create, demonstrate, deliver, and accelerate. And that last one's also very important to us as well. But one thing on that create aspect to lean into is partnerships. So if the aggregate capacity for the supply of goods cannot meet the demand for that, we need to think about faster ways of doing, better ways of doing, cheaper, but then also that's unlocked through partnerships and networks. And so that's very critical to us. And then showing and demonstrating those, delivering and then accelerating, that's also important to us because we realize is that um, climate change and the rate of climate change is increasing, and we can't simply uh, believe that we're eventually going to catch up. That's just not how speed and acceleration works. And so if the climate's moving faster and we're moving slower, then the climate's going to outpace us. So this belief is that, yeah, we're going to eventually get there in 2030 or 2040 and 50 is flat out false. What we need to do and what's really important is actually to accelerate to meet the pace of climate change. And we're
Yeah.
very keen on doing that. And reducing the engineering time, finding new business models, creating policy that unlocks private capital and more. That's where we get to when it comes to our services. And I'll briefly talk about those on slide 12.
Let's
And you
do it.
see these on slide 12. And all of these can relate to individual project areas or subject matter. Like Mike, you mentioned hydrogen. We could talk about off grid access. We could talk about decarbonization of the national electric grid, a lot of those. But what I really enjoy about bringing this up and talking about it briefly is that this is a broader way of looking at a public institution and what they can do for society. So solutions brokering is very focused on correctly identifying the scope of the problem. And to kindly quote Eisenhower, sometimes you can't see a solution until you expand the scope of the problem, which means you get more levers and stuff to use. And then once we correctly identify that, engaging through master planning, and we do that at a national decarbonization level, state, regional, sometimes for large scale campuses and military bases for what's it going to look like to 2040 and beyond, individual project development. So, what are you going to build, when, and how? We've done this for 100 different sites in the last year. We have 150 sites coming up in this next year already under contracting. Research and development is kind of the standard aspect of a university, new knowledge IP. Demonstration and evaluation, very important to have public private partnerships. So if you created something, does it work in the real market? And then training and capacity building is getting back to that. The third enterprise at ASU is that learning enterprise is training the future workforce and respecting and realizing that the half life, according to Pew Research, of an academic degree or knowledge is 5 years. And so half of what you had learned is now outdated or useless in 5 years. And so we can't just expect to maintain the capacity as a globe based upon what degree you have. And so we train about 1,000 people per year, grid modernization, energy security, cybersecurity, and more in about 15 countries. And so this is how we show up. And later on at your discretion, we can talk about specific projects as well. But I think this is nice to kind of share to the audience that,
No,
so
this
you're a
is no,
university,
this
you
is
write
great stuff.
papers and stuff. So go ahead.
This is great stuff. This one, this slide and what you were talking about really leads me to a question of when you get to training and capacity building, right? That training and capacity building, capacity can be physical or it can be intelligence capacity, right? And that's the training part of it. But it requires that there's transparency and collaboration outside of the university and even academia. So, how is that handled? ASU is not. I mean, you're not working in a bubble. You're not confined, right? There are other universities that are working with this, and there's shared intelligence between them, right? To make these things happen. How does that facilitate it, and can that and is it being applied as an accelerator to producing these new energies in private industry, right? In other words, you have geopolitical issues that happen,
Yep.
but you also have corporate political issues between corporations and competition that naturally halt acceleration if you can break them down and collaborate. Is there focus on trying to facilitate that at your level, or is that something that you just kind of hope they realize that it works here and therefore it should be there?
That's an excellent question. And the most of the technologies we work with are past their infancy, but you might say they're in their adolescence and not to maturity yet.
Right.
And that fast moving, semi regulated space gives people a lot of opportunity for exploration to kind of make statements or set policy agenda and standards. And
Yeah.
much like we've gone to, I don't have one immediately in front of me, but yeah, I do, is, this is an HDMI, but USB, for example, A, B, and C now have gone through different industry standards to say we are going to accept this as the single plug-in connection, at least within the, I think it's either Britain or the broader EU. And that's the same thing that also occurs for many professions as you get to the point of credentialing, such as an electrician, a solar PV installer, and more. And microgrids and battery systems, the and a few other technologies, EVs and more, they're a little bit earlier in their sectoral development, and so there's people like us that provide training. There's some people that provide continuing education credits, but there's no unified standard for this is the set of knowledge that you should have. And if briefly bringing up slide 28 to kind of share a little bit about our training and capacity building for microgrids. So these are grid connected but isolatable power systems that can connect or disconnect from the grid at will, have a separate control system, and they also have localized generation, solar batteries, wind generators, and more. And we started this effort about 7 years ago, volunteering, as we were supporting military veterans who were transitioning out of the U.S. military into the civilian workplace, and we're providing them with upskilling and capabilities to then be more competitive in the civilian workforce. We didn't realize the size of the demand signal at the time, so we were building and growing this effort. Kind of getting to the answer to your question, your great question, Mike, is that building and growing this effort. But from the time that I've spent in corporate ventures and then also helping some companies go to Series A and Series B, is that it's easy to start a business with sweat equity, but you can't scale on sweat equity. So after about 3 years of volunteering, training a few hundred veterans and others, we sought federal and private capital, and then secured this to, we have now about 1,000 training per year, people per year. And you see the organizations there listed upon the bottom, which is only probably about a quarter of the groups that we work with in this space. And all of these groups, have different perspectives. Some of them are just on off-grid systems, others are on-grid. The Navy ones, the NAVFAC, they're of course related to U.S. defense infrastructure, different requirements, different standards. But what we did do is work with all these groups to put that diagram together in the middle, which is a generalizable framework for how do you think about power systems of this style. And then we provide a generalized level of credentialing to everyone, specialized for managers, engineers, operators, and technicians. And then we sub out the examples, standards, business model requirements based upon the application space. Is it a hospital? Is it a casino? Is it a water pumping station or more? And that's
Mm-hmm.
allowed us to work with all of these different people that you mentioned in a way that's flexible, but then also brings all of the knowledge together into this group. And we're right now, I would say, an informal consortium, but looking to formalize that, which would then lead to a communities of practice and then to formal credentials and
Gotcha. So the answer is yes.
more. You caught me being a professor there.
No, that was fantastic. And I'm looking at this, and again, I spend forever discussing the different parts of this with you. And one of them on this that hits me on this particular slide is utility rates, right? Because that brings forth one of the very real world hurdles to that acceleration and catching climate change. is the ability to adopt and adopt and adapt new energies into our current infrastructure, both physical but also financial, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Germany, 10 days dropped their cost per megawatt from 9 or 70 euros to 9 euros for green solar energy. Yes, but no, that's bad. I mean, right? We should be celebrating that, but working through those hurdles and issues that causes is
Mhm.
part of the problem as well, right?
Yeah, and looking at we have as a society required the utilities to provide safe, reliable, and affordable power, and it always goes in that order. And now we're adding sustainable energy and sustainable power to that mix, and that is usually still last because um, it's going to be hard to have an entity or business that has unsafe or poor electrical practices while trying to be sustainable. Like you need to ensure people's safety first, and there's
Yes,
like
of
UL
course.
1547 and things like that out as a result to maintain that safety. Um, but in looking at then as economic development occurred, particularly looking at the United States in this particular example, we advocated for and accelerated the deployment of coal fired power plants. And then we're able to successfully reduce the utilization on those and sometimes close them down early through the additional of natural gas, which wouldn't have occurred without the horizontal drilling and uh, acquiring lower cost natural gas resources that led to the deployment of those to be more dispatchable to fill in for places where the coal power plants couldn't or the solar or wind wasn't producing. But we still need to do more renewables and also with any remaining fossil generation that is out there, be able to capture and sequester, utilize the carbon. So we have a net zero solution. And looking, of course, also, which is a little bit broader conversation, transportation, aviation, and more. At some point, the replacement of liquid fuels might be just non-feasible or at least too costly. So then how do we pull the carbon out of the air that's being created? So when you think about renewables, you're 100% right. And that's usually one of the main goals in our work is yes, safety, reliability, affordability, and sustainability. We're advancing all of those. And on the sustainability front, part of the challenge for us is that where we need to unlock new value propositions is that if we can get the generation cost low, 2 cents per kilowatt hour for utility scale solar projects, the delivered cost for the customer still might be 10, 15, 20, or 30 cents. And so that's due to the addition of transmission cost, distribution cost, retail cost, billing, and other things that come into the mix beyond the generation. And so some localities have the majority of those costs are actually made up by the non-generation. Some locations around the world, the majority of their uh, customer costs are by generation. So it kind of depends on where you're at. But as we advance those, we turn off coal plants earlier. Then how do we firm up and have that dispatchable generation? So some people are going to natural gas, others additional storage. One thing that we also like to advocate, and this was advanced by the DOE as well, I think in a study about 3 to 4 months ago, is virtual power plants. So, how do, of all of the distributed generation assets out there, electric vehicles, solar, storage, but then also thermostats, hot water heaters, and more, how do we utilize those as basically one big dial that if load gets too high and we don't have enough conventional generation or solar, whatever that is, we have the customers reduce the load at their point of operation. And therefore, we don't need to turn on the diesel generators. We don't need to turn on the natural gas. We don't need to turn on that coal generator, is because we're able to reduce the loads to meet the renewables of where we are. And there's a significant opportunity there that we're just starting to explore. And there's not even much regulation or standards out there yet.
Was that? I mean, that implies that you would have to have priorities for consumption listed and agreed to as a society, right? If you're going to
Ah,
automatically trip and change the demand based on right the production.
it's a good question. So there's two major categories of scenarios that you could get into. Is if there's resource inadequacy, so the utility doesn't have enough generation assets, There's certain policies in place where they can do like load shedding events, which has happened occasionally in the United States, and then also globally, more common in emerging markets that had like hydropower, but then the hydropower could meet demand over longer time frames. So they have to just turn off, zip codes at a time. In this particular scenario, we wouldn't do load shedding, but the utility would send a signal that says, hey, if you reduce your power, we're going to give you a financial credit. And so sometimes that can be done at the moment of that exchange. Other times it can be to say, hey, I want, as the utility, the ability to turn off your hot water heater for 50 hours of the year or 100 hours of the year, and I'm going to give you
I
a
got it.
$100
Yeah.
credit every year. And that's actually a lot simpler from a transaction point, because then you have less exchange of information, simpler cybersecurity, simpler communication, less data being shared. But we're
Gotcha.
advancing those topics as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I had a warehouse operation in Miami that the power utility could tap into my two very, very large generators that were there to ensure that we operated through independently through a hurricane recovery. And so they could grab power from me at specific times, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if they needed, to avoid a brownout or whatever, and to promote the ability to, be able to generate your own power at
Yeah.
need, they could tap into that source as well. It's kind
And
of
what's interesting, to take two cases like California and Texas. So California, after the firestorms, blackouts, and destruction in the last few years, when I was there, it was 2 summers ago. We all got a text message, and it was, "Hey, turn up your thermostats to a higher setting because we're in a low reserve margin." And it ended up, that simple automated text response ended up saving the utilities from being in a resource inadequacy period or event, because it was hotter than typical, and there was some generation assets that weren't possible to turn on. And that customer response, or that social or society response, probably wouldn't have happened as large as it did had they not felt the, oh no, the lights went off, the power went off scenario when it was already hot and there were firestorms the year prior. So since they
yeah,
went through that experience, we're all in this together, a social feeling allowed the utilities to send out a text message that, saved everyone. In Texas, they've also experienced some weather-related or climate-related issues that has exposed vulnerability in infrastructure, and they're thinking
yeah,
through, of course, now how to weatherize systems according to federal standards, but then also how to diversify the resource mix. And I don't think they've gone to the standpoint of, sending out a text message to users, but that could be, another step for them.
yeah. The Great Texas Freeze, if I recall,
Indeed.
was was a big issue. It's a very big issue. So let me ask you this: is there you, you, we're talking about the transition, right? And we have to get to that transition. You talked about the ability to assist and adjust demand given reserves and capacity, et cetera. How do we, and are you working on the ability to have what we have now as traditional as that backup as we transition to new? Because yeah, or do we have to just kind of wait it out until it is perfect, right? You have solar, you have wind, but those aren't always there, right? Do we have to wait out that technology, or is there a way to incorporate those without detrimental impacts to the current infrastructure that needs to be there as an impact, right?
Yep.
Or as a backup? I mean, you can't maintain the nuclear power plant here down the road from me with half the power demand because it's sunny outside. How do you overcome that, or is there work doing that, or do we just simply have to say, well, we'll figure that out when we get there?
No, your question hits on a couple of very important notes, and we can't wait to figure out till we get there to answer your question with greater brevity than I have past questions that you have kindly posed. The, the, the other thing to consider in
That's
that
a
is that
great answer. I'm going to have to remember that for next time.
And we're done for the
I
day.
love that. That was a great. That
um,
was it, folks. So we're gonna drop the mic right on that. Actually,
but your question is also well founded because it's utilities have generally been in a state of where the technology and needs are, grow, build, grow, build, grow, build, and you start from load forecasting, and then where do the resources come from, generation, transmission, and then distribution is kind of an afterthought or later stage. You can't do that anymore, largely because of the dynamic nature at the load centers. They're variable with solar and storage in people's houses, but then also certain customers are simply just massive. Like we have a semiconductor firm that came into town, and their load is about 1,000 megawatts of power just in that one site, right? So you have data
yeah,
centers and stuff kind of disrupting that. And so two things, if I could briefly mention and bring up as examples, one is on slide 19, and
sure.
this gets to the climate reduction action plan for Arizona. And so, funded and supported by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to the state of Arizona, that kindly contracted Northern Arizona University and Arizona State University to conduct the studies and engagements for them, is that we realize that the state's going to grow fast and is increasingly going faster, and any of our estimates about economic development are actually low, even though the aggressive estimates end up being low. And as an example of that, it takes about a year to build a data center, but it takes 4 years to get the power out there to run it. And so we're not able to make the demand, but we also need to decarbonize. And so part of it is at a state level that's connected to the regional Southwest, looking at 5, 10, 20 years of all of the utility expansion plans, integrated system planning, integrated resource planning, and more, to take a look at how are they going to plan out addressing it within their service territory, connected to others, and then also looking at other groups that are now starting to come to the table, electric vehicle manufacturers, major load centers, and more, that are becoming major players or major stakeholders that now need to be a direct seat at the table. And we get involved in those conversations to help broker solutions and visions. And to give you one example of what we do there, slide 25 from an individual site. So this is for Arizona National Guard installation. And so if you have the master plan, now let's take this to an individual project and a demonstration. So it's a moderate sized systems, about 350 kilowatts, supported and financed through the Department of Defense. We're the prime contractor. Climate Tech is a building automation firm. ELM is the individual inverter battery technology integrator. SRP, Salt River Project, is utility. And then AZDMA is a National Guard you see there on the lower right. So what we've been able to demonstrate is, yes, we can advance those master plans out further. And you know what? We might not need to build large infrastructure. So what we did here is we took federal investments that had already been made for a building automation system and a microgrid, done separately because congressional money often flows and funds those two things separately, and put a single control system that allows that incorporates the data and controls on building automation, the microgrid controls, into one master supervisory control system. So what we demonstrated and are still gathering data on this is we built nothing. We connected controls from at a single site, and we provided more intelligent control with forecasting, and we've been able to reduce the electric bill by 10%. And if the grid does go down for whatever reason, we've been able to give a 25% improvement in the chance of keeping your lights on for 7 days, which is the federal defense requirement for military installations. And
Oh,
again, no new capital. We're able to demonstrate the stacked value of these resources. And this is where we like to get involved, is like, hey, you know what? People are investing tens of thousands of dollars in homes, millions of dollars in a facility like my building here, or potentially billions of dollars in a state or more. How do we make your investment go further than you did, than you think you could do? And that's a great place to play. And the utility loves to work with us on this because then it's a demonstration of advanced distribution energy management systems for them.
that is amazing. That is amazing. I didn't know it was 7 days. That's cool. So we predict we can win a war in 7 days, I guess is what it is, right? Or get it over with. Yeah, that is tremendous. I want to ask you this: Is there is the advent of new technology kind of a perfect storm for what we're trying to do? Meaning, eh, the pressures on the infrastructure and everything that you're talking about right now, right? Just maintaining and keeping it up to snuff is difficult. Now you're trying to keep up with just the growth in population and industry that would normally be happening. Let's just call it normal for no other
Yep.
lack of a better word, right? A natural trajectory of growth in the economy and population, so demand of energy, right? And now you throw on it these popular new technologies like electric vehicles, right? Which, if we were to go completely electric, can we sustain that and actually power them at the breakneck speed at which the mandates are trying to
Mhm.
force that to occur? And then other things that people don't realize just what a strain on the infrastructure energy grid they put, and that would be like AI. AI is a massive strain on water and energy, and I don't think people understand that in order for AI to get to the level that they think it's going to or want it to get to in 10 years, you can possibly power it.
Yep.
Is that are these things that you're contending with now, and what are your thoughts on those?
Right. Um, with these, one thing to take your last question maybe first is that with these um, data centers or manufacturing and more, they have high electrical loads, and then also in manufacturing there's process heat. And so a good question is, well, there's not enough roof space to provide solar to meet that need. And so that gets into small modular nuclear reactors, which is currently, I think the people that I know and work with that are know a lot about that space. We all concur that it's no longer an if question; it's a when, because there's enough in development, enough in contracting. It's, when are they going to get installed and where? And there's a few under contract to actually be built right now. So it's an important space
Yeah,
to follow. And then also the waste heat could then allow decarbonization of process heat, which is required for so many different manufacturing processes. And part of actually what Arizona's state universities work is in this space. It was awarded a $70 million manufacturing hub from the Department of Energy to decarbonize process heat. And a lot of that comes from manufacturing and mining. And so how do you build an electric driven smelter? Then if you build that, a good question is, well, then how are you going to power it? So it becomes, to get back to Eisenhower's quote, is like, maybe you just need to expand the scope of the problem and then you find new solutions.
yeah, that's interesting. It's so we all need a Mr. Fusion is what we're looking for, right?
It's, higher, it's dense, greener power generation. It could be hydrogen. It could be I think
Yeah,
it's,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I don't back a single technology because if you look at today in history, it's kind of a mix anyway. But there's a really good conversation to have, and which is what we enjoy, is that for your local or regional need, what is going to be the appropriate mix, and then providing a data informed discussion to people making the decisions for their locality.
I got you. So is it possible? So all right, that was going to be one of my questions, but let's bring it up right now. Is does there have to be a clear winner or a majority winner in order for the economies of scale and the efficiencies to bear out, or does it
Mm,
more likely lean towards a tapestry or a network of different types of energy sources?
right. I don't see one source winning out. There can be some isolated scenarios where, like certain island nation states that have a significant amount of rainfall, have hydro and they just run off of hydro.
Gotcha.
So that can provide on demand power, but then a large reserve. And so there are some examples where it's nearly, um, I almost said monoculture, like bananas or something, right? But
Yeah.
mono energy, or a single energy source. Some
Yeah,
nations also would be like bunker fuel or heavy fuel oil, and they're transitioning as they could to solar and wind and others. But generally, I think it's going to be a mix based upon cost, land availability, and then when that renewable energy source is available relative to when the loads are.
gotcha, gotcha. So, hey, how about a couple things you guys are working on? Just straight up projects. Anything cool that you guys are working on? What's your favorite project you guys are working on right now?
Yeah.
Or the
So
most promising, like, are you turning, ants into power or anything like that? Or
no, I haven't lived through a bug's life, but some of my kids have. Let's see. A couple ones to mention to you is that connection between master planning and demonstration. We've been getting increasingly involved in project development because again, there's so many people out there with money and work. I think the estimate is something like $3 billion was pledged in the last few years for off-grid isolated mini grid systems is what we call them, but about 8% of it has actually reached financial close. And so part of where we get involved is actually doing project development to de-risk that, increase investor confidence and certainty, and then also provide the technical and financial models that are realizable. So to give that as a specific example, in next week I'll be headed to Fiji with a few of my colleagues
oh, that
to.
sucks.
I know, right? Yeah. To provide, in partnership with the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, the Fiji government, the United Nations Development Program, Global Green Growth Institute, Zindi Corporation, and the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, is the designs plans for 75 isolated communities in the Fiji's outer islands that will then go out to tender. And so the expected investment is on the range of like $40 million, and that wouldn't have been possible had we not had enhanced methods and research that allowed us to decrease the time and cost to do each site assessments and design. From that new technology and intellectual property side, yeah, I think a lot of the distributed controls is becoming very viable, and we're demonstrating those on sites, but then also bundles of sites, so like dozens of homes and communities at a time, to
Gotcha.
then manage our power uh, based upon when it's available, what's in storage, and then adjusting the loads in a way that reduces cost and enhances sustainability for everyone.
Gotcha.
So those are a couple of our areas. Also getting involved with a significant amount of work for tribal communities in the state of Arizona. We're leading or supporting about $240 million of implementation money coming out through recent investments through the U.S. federal government for enhancing energy access for LIDAC, that's lower income and disadvantaged communities in the state of Arizona, and then tribal nation partners, the Hopi tribe being the principal of those. And those are fantastic efforts that include master planning, project development, demonstration, and training. So the whole suite of our services model we're partnering with. And it's also very important to us is that in all the work we do, we show up as a partner because we're here to learn, we're here to share, we're here to grow, and we can do that as partners, particularly as the energy industry moves and changes quicker than it has a lot in the past. And if you just, get a contract and then you execute to fit over a 5 year period, the world is going to be different in 5 years. And a partner is going to change with you, but a contractor won't.
So those are all excellent, and I urge everybody to check out the links that I have at the bottom of the page here to go check out what you guys are doing and get involved. If you're interested in this type of stuff, just look up Nate and go sign up. Go to go to ASU and let's make some stuff happen because it's incredibly important. But I got one last question. I know we're like pretty much out of time, but I really need to ask this question. It's how often uh, do philosophical and or ethical type of issues or um, discussions occur in what you're doing from the sense like we talked about is
Mm.
we have the ability to uplift all societies, but there's also you know the development of different types of energies um, creates the ability for man, because man has fallen, to wage war and um, to better strategize for war. Right? If
Mm.
like we saw with Europe in the winter after the invasion of Ukraine, etc. Um, does this potential new energies reduce in your mind, or almost empower the ability to then side? Because there's, in other words, there's there are alliances that are there that are only there because you cut off an energy supply and you're done. So you can't make this ethical choice or that ethical choice as individual micro societies. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
That's a good remark. Two reflections back. One is there's a topic known as just transition. So society's been built and grown. We touched upon this earlier, largely by coal-fired power plants in the United States. And now that society says we need to decarbonize, it's the coal-fired power plant shut down, and due to the remoteness of those and proximity to rural communities, shutting those down means that leads to a significant loss of revenue. And that's one of the reasons we partnered with the Hopi tribe, because when that generation station was closed, they lost 85% of their revenue for the Hopi tribe. And so that we need to figure out a way. We can't just derelict people because our values change. That's
Right,
inappropriate. So
right.
we do get involved from a foundational ethical perspective there. You make a good remark about what about these new technologies, and if they're increasingly distributed and you become the sovereign producer of your own energy, water, and more, the topics of ethics and morality actually start to come up, I would say, less and less, is because you're reducing the number of people that are connected to your problem space. And so, like, if you had your energy source and I had my energy source, and each person in my team or et cetera had theirs, ethics and morality won't go away, but the um, relation of those to energy would decrease or diminish because we can make our own choices about our own energy, and your morality and my morality don't need to come into conflict, or your ethics and my ethics don't need to come into conflict because we're not sharing any energy and I'm not reliant on you for it. So it would, I would say, lead to a place that could allow us a future that has less conflict and fewer conflict if we can localize, we can support communities, and we can grow renewables in a way that are less reliant on people that might have interests outside of yours that you rely on their energy for.
Yeah, so you're reducing, in a sense, the balance of haves and has nots. Just that's taking it away in the energy side of it. It's excellent stuff, Nathan. We're out of time. I mean, we're over time, but I loved it. We're going to have to discuss more and more as we go into there, and specific types of energies. I'd like to get into transportation energies and renewable aviation fuels and all these different mandates that are out there for capacities, and can we reach them, and those type of things. Some of your prognostication, put on your prognosticator hat, if you will, in the future at some time. But this was excellent stuff, brother. Where are people reaching out to you to learn more and read what you guys are doing?
Please do. You can go to leaps.asu.edu for the web link. And Mike, I really appreciated you sharing your time and the great questions and dialogue today, and also just being on Sustainiacs as a participant, but then also as a viewer. Thanks again, Mike.
Excellent stuff. Thank you so much, Nate. Peace and love, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Take care.